Prince William cut the wax seal on the yellowed envelope, his hands perfectly still. Inside lay a letter written in his mother's sharp, sweeping cursive, dated just weeks before her death in 1997. It named a specific condition regarding Queen Camilla's future that the palace had hidden for 3 decades. 2 hours later, William walked into Clarence's house and slid the document across the table to his stepmother. Camilla took one look at Diana's handwriting, and the room went completely silent. "What's in this letter? Let's find out." The locked box at Althorpe House. Prince William's dark blue Range Rover pulled up to the stable courtyard of Allor House on a cold, overcast morning in late March 2026. He climbed out of the driver's seat alone, nodded to his close protection officers, and walked toward the heavy oak side door of the Spencer family ancestral home. His uncle, Earl Charles Spencer, was waiting for him in the stone corridor. Charles did not offer a grand greeting. He simply held up a small tarnished brass key attached to a faded red ribbon and gestured for William to follow him down the stairs toward the estate's private basement vaults. The two men walked past rows of stored family portraits and crates of 19th-century silver until they reached a secure climate-controlled room at the far end of the cellar. Resting on a steel table in the center of the room was a small scarred leather writing case. The initials DS were stamped in gold foil near the handle, though the lettering had mostly rubbed away over the decades. Charles Spencer stopped by the table and pointed to the case. He explained that a senior estate solicitor had discovered the box 3 days prior while clearing out an old filing cabinet in the estate's private legal office. The box had remained completely untouched since September 1997. William took the brass key from his uncle, fitted it into the lock, and turned it until the mechanism released with a sharp metallic snap. He lifted the heavy leather lid. Inside the case sat a small stack of private photographs, an old leather-bound diary, and a single heavy vellum envelope sealed with blue wax. The wax bore the unmistakable imprint of Princess Diana's personal signate ring. William picked up the envelope, feeling the weight of the thick paper between his fingers. He looked at his mother's distinct handwriting on the front, which simply bore his own name. William turned the faded pages over, noticing a secondary red ink stamp from a London courier firm dated August 15, 1997. He signaled to his personal protection officer to take a high-resolution photograph of the tracking number using a secure palace device. The officer logged the entry into the Kensington Palace Security Registry, cross-referencing it with the official travel logs from that exact week in the late 90s. The records confirmed that Diana's personal driver had made an unlisted journey from London to Althorpe on that precise Friday afternoon, carrying a secure administrative pouch. This concrete physical trail proved that the document had not been altered or moved since the day it was sealed, establishing an unbroken chain of custody that would easily withstand the scrutiny of any royal archivist or senior government official trying to suppress its existence. Charles Spencer walked out of the room to give his nephew privacy. Closing the heavy vault door behind him, William sat down on a plain wooden chair under the bare bulb of the basement ceiling. He used his pocket knife to carefully slice through the blue wax, making sure not to damage the paper beneath. He pulled out 3 pages of closely written text dated August 14, 1997, just 17 days before Diana's fatal car crash in Paris. The ink was a deep navy blue written with the specific fountain pen Diana used for her most private correspondence. The text did not contain casual family updates or emotional farewells. It was structured like a formal legal memorandum detailing a series of specific binding conditions regarding the future management of her personal estate, her titles, and her expectations for her children's futures. As William read the first page, his eyes stopped on a heavily underlined section halfway down the sheet. Diana had laid out a precise set of institutional restrictions regarding the woman who would eventually marry King Charles. She wrote that under no circumstances should the woman known as Camilla Parker B.S. ever inherit or utilize the personal jewels, ancestral property, or ceremonial titles belonging directly to the Spencer family lineage. This document presented a massive challenge to the current palace narrative. For the past 20 years, Queen Camilla's team had been working systematically to integrate her into every facet of royal life, including the use of historic jewelry pieces that the public traditionally associated with Princess Diana. The legal reality of the British monarchy dictates that while the crown jewels belong to the state, a princess's private collection remains bound by the terms of her personal will and the wishes of her estate trustees. Diana's letter explicitly stated that if Camilla ever attempted to claim these specific items, the Spencer family trustees held the immediate right to launch a public injunction to reclaim them. William folded the papers and placed them carefully inside his inside jacket pocket. He walked out of the vault and met his uncle in the main courtyard. He told Charles that the contents of the box would remain strictly confidential until he had consulted with his own legal advisors at Kensington Palace. He climbed back into his vehicle and drove back toward London, the 3 pages of vellum resting securely against his chest. He knew that the document changed the entire balance of power within the royal household, providing him with an unassailable piece of leverage that his stepmother's team could not ignore. When William arrived back at his private office at Kensington Palace, he immediately bypassed his standard administrative staff. He called a single trusted senior solicitor who had managed his mother's private trust fund since the late 90s. The solicitor arrived within 45 minutes, carrying a secure briefcase. William laid the 3 pages flat on his desk and asked him to verify the legal standing of the document. The solicitor put on his glasses, scanned the text, and pointed to the final paragraph on the 3rd page. The text showed that Diana had not just written a personal letter. She had formally executed the document in the presence of 2 independent legal witnesses whose signatures were clearly visible at the bottom of the page. The solicitor looked up at William and stated that the document was fully binding under English trust law. He explained that if William chose to enforce these terms, Camilla's current use of certain ceremonial assets would become an immediate legal violation. This left William with a critical decision to make. He held the power to completely upend his stepmother's public standing and strip her of key elements of her royal identity. But he also knew that revealing the document would trigger a massive internal war within the family, forcing his father to choose between his late wife's legal wishes and his current queen's public dignity. The mystery of how this letter had remained hidden for 30 years was still unsolved, but the immediate priority was how to use its contents to protect the future of the monarchy. William reached for his desk phone and placed a direct call to Clarence House, requesting an urgent private meeting with Queen Camilla for the following afternoon. The 4 words that stopped Clarence House. Queen Camilla's private secretary stood by the window of the morning room at Clarence House, watching a courier deliver a thick cream-colored envelope to the security desk. It was 3 o'clock on a Thursday afternoon in late March 2026. 5 minutes later, the secretary brought the letter upstairs to the Queen's private sitting room, where Camilla was reviewing notes for an upcoming television interview about her literary charity. Camilla took the envelope, saw the official Kensington Palace stamp, and used a silver letter opener to slide it open. Inside was a single photocopied page of Princess Diana's handwritten letter accompanied by a brief formal note from Prince William's personal solicitor. Camilla read the first 4 lines of her late predecessor's handwriting, and her hands dropped to her lap. The specific sentence she stared at was written in bold, thick ink. It stated that Camilla was an administrative squatter in Windsor history. The raw directness of the phrasing caught the Queen completely off guard. She did not call for her advisors or demand an explanation from her staff. Instead, she stood up, walked over to her desk, and picked up the telephone to call her chief of staff. She told him to immediately contact the broadcasting network and cancel the television appearance scheduled for the following morning, citing a sudden scheduling conflict. At the television studio in central London, the executive producers were thrown into immediate chaos when the red telephone from Clarence House rang. The technical crew had already set up the lighting grids and calibrated the cameras for the Queen's exclusive morning interview. When the cancellation notice was delivered, the studio head demanded a direct explanation from the palace press liaison, pointing out that airtime had already been cleared across the national network. The liaison could only offer a vague statement about an unforeseen scheduling conflict, but the studio veterans knew that a sudden cancellation from a senior royal always signaled an internal palace emergency. Behind the scenes, journalists immediately began calling their contacts within the Lord Chamberlain's office, sensing that a major shift in the household's administrative structure was occurring behind closed doors. The immediate cancellation of a major television interview sent shockwaves through the Clarence House press office. In the royal media machinery, Canceling a national broadcast at less than 24 hours' notice is an absolute emergency. It signals to the press that something is deeply wrong behind palace walls. Camilla's media team spent the next 2 hours fabricating a plausible medical excuse for the journalists, while the Queen herself remained behind locked doors with her top legal counsel. The single page William had sent was a clear warning shot, and the message was received with absolute clarity. The facts surrounding the Spencer family trust were clear, but heavily guarded. When Diana divorced Charles in 1996, her final legal settlement included a massive payout alongside a highly specific property clause. This clause dictated that certain historic items, including the iconic Spencer tiara and several high-profile sapphire sets, were technically loaned to the royal pool for Diana's lifetime use only. Upon her passing, ownership automatically reverted to a private family trust managed jointly by her brother Charles Spencer and her 2 sons. Camilla had been photographed wearing several pieces from the wider royal collection that closely resembled these family heirlooms, creating constant public comparisons that her office deeply despised. William's decision to send the photocopy was a calculated tactical move. He was not looking for a public shouting match with his stepmother. He was establishing a boundary by showing her that he possessed the full legally binding text of his mother's final wishes. He was demonstrating that he could dismantle her ceremonial authority whenever he chose. If Camilla continued to push her own administrative agenda regarding the royal estates, William could simply release the full text of the letter to the High Court, forcing a public asset dispute that would completely ruin her public reputation. The tension inside the household grew thick as the afternoon turned to evening. Camilla's lawyers spent hours analyzing the single page William had provided, trying to find a legal loophole or a flaw in the phrasing. They argued that because the document was a photocopy, its legal validity could not be verified without seeing the original vellum pages. They suggested to Camilla that William might be bluffing, using an unverified draft found in the Althorpe archives to scare her into backing down from her current administrative expansions. Camilla wasn't convinced by her lawyer's optimism. She knew Diana's handwriting perfectly from the dozens of letters they had exchanged during the turbulent years of the early 90s. She recognized the specific layout of the pages and the unique way Diana crossed her capital letters. It was not a draft. It was a completed witness document that had been hidden intentionally until the perfect moment. Camilla told her legal team that they could not afford to treat the letter as a bluff until they knew exactly what was on the remaining 2 pages that William had withheld. This created an intense, quiet standoff between the 2 households. William's office at Kensington Palace remained completely silent, refusing to answer follow-up calls from Clarence House regarding the letter. He had laid his terms on the table without a single verbal argument, leaving his stepmother to stew in the uncertainty of what else his mother had written. The mystery of the remaining pages hung over the entire palace administration like a dark cloud, threatening to disrupt the fragile stability of the king's current court. But as night fell over London, a new complication arose within the palace security department. A senior watch officer at the Buckingham Palace gate logged an unannounced arrival at 10 o'clock. A private car belonging to a retired forensic document analyst had been cleared through the security checkpoint under a high-priority clearance code issued directly by William's office. The analyst was carrying a large, heavy leather scanning case. The staff wondered why William was bringing in an outside forensic specialist in the middle of the night, and what physical evidence he was trying to verify before his scheduled face-to-face meeting with the Queen the following day. The irrefutable proof of a mother's hand. The high-resolution digital scanner hummed on the mahogany table in William's private study at Kensington Palace. It was midnight on the Friday following the delivery of the letter. Dr. Elizabeth Vance, a retired senior forensic handwriting analyst from Scotland Yard, leaned over her computer screen. She had spent the last 2 hours analyzing the micro-grooves of the navy blue ink under a specialized ultraviolet light. Prince William stood behind her, his eyes fixed on the display monitor. Beside the scanner sat the original 3 pages of thick vellum paper. Dr. Vance clicked her mouse, zooming in on the final paragraph of the 3rd page. She pointed her stylus at the signatures of the 2 legal witnesses. She looked up at William and stated that the indentation depth matched a standard Mont Blanc fountain pen from the mid-90s. The paper stock was watermarked from a specific stationery manufacturer in Gloucestershire that went out of business in 1999. This was not a modern digital forgery, nor was it a piece of modified text. It was an authentic, legally executed document from August 1997. The verification process was an absolute necessity for William's legal team. When a document threatens the public status of the Queen Consort, the Central Palace administration will automatically try to dismiss it as a fraud. Camilla's lawyers had already spent the morning drafting a preliminary statement to the High Court, prepared to claim that the letter was an unverified draft with no constitutional authority. Dr. Vance's formal forensic report completely destroyed that defensive strategy. The ink, the paper, and the witness signatures were undeniably genuine. The legal realities of the royal estate trusts were incredibly rigid. Private letters from a deceased royal family member are usually kept under lock and key by the royal archives for at least 100 years. But this specific letter had never entered the state archives. Because Diana had written it while staying at All House and left it in her private Spencer legal box, it fell entirely under civil probate law rather than royal prerogative. The Spencer trustees held full legal authority to enforce its terms without seeking permission from the king or parliament. The tension grew sharper as Dr. Vance began packing her scanning equipment back into her leather cases. She reached in her pocket and pulled out a small translucent plastic evidence bag. She laid it gently on the desk next to the vellum pages. Inside the bag was a tiny solid gold charm shaped like a polo mallet engraved with the initials D and W. The charm had fallen out of the deeper folds of the heavy envelope when she first opened it under the laboratory hood. William picked up the plastic bag, looking closely at the scratched gold surface. He remembered the charm instantly. It was a private piece from a charm bracelet his mother had worn constantly during his childhood at Kensington Palace. Diana had intentionally dropped the gold piece into the envelope alongside the vellum pages to serve as an instant, unmistakable physical proof of identity for her eldest son. It was a detail that no outside forger or disgruntled courtier could have possibly known or replicated. This physical discovery changed the entire legal dynamic of the conflict. William's solicitors immediately added the forensic scan of the gold charm to the official master file. It provided his team with absolute leverage. If Camilla's lawyers attempted to drag the dispute into a prolonged court battle, William could present the charm alongside the forensic analysis to the family court judges, proving the absolute authenticity of his mother's final mandates. The news of the forensic verification traveled quickly through the secure internal messaging servers, connecting the royal households. By 2 o'clock in the morning, a senior advisor at Clarence House logged a direct alert on Camilla's private tablet. The alert confirmed that Kensington Palace had successfully finalized a full forensic validation of the document using an independent outside specialist. Camilla's legal team realized that their primary line of defense had collapsed before the sun had even risen. The mystery of why this specific gold charm and letter had remained completely undisturbed for nearly 30 years in the Althorpe cellars was still a massive question mark for William. He knew his Uncle Charles Spencer was a meticulous keeper of the family records. Yet the box had somehow evaded every single estate audit since 1997. The staff began to whisper that the box had not been lost at all. It had been held back intentionally by a trusted third party who was waiting for a specific constitutional crisis to hand it over. As the early morning light began to hit the windows of Kensington Palace, William's chief of staff walked into the study, carrying a fresh folder of briefings. He informed the prince that a personal courier from the king's private secretary had just arrived at the front gate. The courier carried an urgent handwritten note from King Charles, requesting that William come to Windsor Castle for a private family summit before his scheduled meeting with Camilla. The king was finally stepping into the arena, and William needed to decide how much of his mother's evidence he was willing to expose to his father. The broken silence of 1997. Prince William walked into the private dining room of the Goring Hotel in Belgravia. At 10 o'clock on Saturday morning, the room was empty except for an elderly woman sitting by the window holding a porcelain teacup. She wore a simple dark wool coat and a strand of pearls. This was Lady Sarah McCorquodle, Princess Diana's eldest sister and a co-executive of her original 1996 will. She did not stand up when her nephew entered. She simply pointed to the empty chair across from her and pushed a small velvet-lined jewelry box across the white tablecloth. William sat down, took the velvet box, and opened it. Inside was a matching gold polo mallet charm, identical to the one Dr. Vance had discovered in the vellum envelope the night before. Lady Sarah looked at the charm, then looked directly at William. She told him that she was the one who had instructed the estate solicitor to place the leather writing case in the Althorpe filing cabinet back in the spring of 1998. She had kept the master key in her personal safe for nearly 30 years, waiting for the exact moment when the stability of the Spencer family legacy was genuinely threatened by the new palace hierarchy. The facts of the 1997 transition were complicated but well documented in the family archives. Following Diana's passing, a massive legal effort was launched by the royal household to secure her private papers and diaries to prevent public disclosures. A team of palace lawyers spent weeks at Kensington Palace sorting through her personal effects. Lady Sarah, alongside her brother, Charles Spencer, managed to quietly intercept several boxes of highly sensitive personal correspondence before the official palace inventory team arrived. They did this to protect Diana's private wishes from being buried forever inside the royal archives at Windsor Castle. Lady Sarah explained the exact timeline to William. In August 1997, Diana had grown increasingly concerned about the long-term future of her son's inheritance, particularly if Charles remarried. She drafted the legal memorandum with her personal solicitor at Althorpe, specifically ensuring that 2 independent estate workers witnessed her signature. She then handed the sealed vellum envelope to Sarah, making her promise to hold the document until William reached a position where he had the full institutional authority to enforce its terms against the wider royal court. The tension in the small dining room grew sharper as Lady Sarah detailed the terms of the pact. She told William that she had watched from a distance as Queen Camilla's office slowly expanded its administrative footprint over the last 12 months. When she read news reports indicating that Camilla's team was attempting to audit the Duche of Cornwall finances and review the traditional Spencer family heirloom loans, she knew the time had come to release the letter. She called the Althorpe solicitor, instructed him to discover the box during a routine filing cleanup, and ensured that Earl Spencer immediately handed the key to William. This revelation completely shifted William's understanding of the conflict. He wasn't just dealing with a random discovery in an old basement cellar. He was executing a long-term deliberate plan that his mother and aunt had put in place 3 decades prior to protect his future sovereignty. The letter was a precision-guided legal tool preserved by the people who knew the inner workings of the palace machinery best. It gave William the absolute historical and legal authority to push back against any administrative changes Camilla's team attempted to force upon his household. Lady Sarah finished her tea, stood up, and adjusted her coat. She told William that the original solicitor who drafted the memorandum was still alive and living in retirement in Wiltshire, fully prepared to give a formal deposition to the High Court if the palace lawyers tried to dispute the witness signatures. She kissed William on the cheek and walked out of the hotel room, leaving him alone with the matching gold charms. The circle of evidence was now completely unbroken, and William possessed everything he needed to settle the dispute permanently. But as William drove away from the hotel toward his scheduled meeting at Windsor Castle, his dashboard display lit up with an urgent message from his head of security. The palace security log showed that Queen Camilla's private vehicle had left Clarence House 45 minutes ahead of schedule, heading toward Windsor instead of her central London office. The king's private secretary had also summoned the head of the Privy Purse to the castle for the emergency summit. The mystery of why the financial head of the monarchy was being brought into a family dispute began to worry William's chief of staff. It suggested that Camilla's team had discovered a parallel financial mechanism within the king's private estate that they intended to use as a counterweight to Diana's legal restrictions. The quiet war was no longer just about family heirlooms and old letters. It was turning into a direct high-stakes negotiation over the immediate distribution of the crown's liquid assets, setting the stage for a final chapter that would permanently alter the financial structure of the throne. Prince William walked into the sovereign's drawing room at Windsor Castle at precisely 1 o'clock on Saturday afternoon. The room was brightly lit by the afternoon sun cutting through the massive Gothic windows. King Charles sat in a high-backed armchair near the marble fireplace, a thick tartan blanket resting over his knees. Queen Camilla stood by the writing desk near the window, her chief of staff standing directly behind her. Sitting on the low coffee table between the chairs was the head of the privy purse, who was holding a leather ledger containing the private financial records of the sovereign's personal estates. William did not take a seat. He walked straight to the center of the room, unzipped his leather briefing case, and pulled out the original 3 vellum pages of Princess Diana's 1997 memorandum. Alongside the paperwork, he laid the 2 matching gold polo mallet charms flat on the polished wood of the table. He looked directly at his father and stated that the document had been forensically verified by Scotland Yard's former top analyst less than 12 hours prior. The signatures were legally binding. The paper stock was authenticated, and the Spencer family trustees were prepared to file an immediate public injunction if the terms were not met by the end of the day. The head of the privy purse picked up the vellum pages, his hands shaking slightly as he scanned the final legal clauses on the 3rd sheet. He looked up at King Charles and nodded slowly, confirming that the document fell strictly under civil probate law rather than the royal prerogative. He explained that Diana's original divorce settlement explicitly tied the loan of the Spencer family jewels and certain historic tiaras to a permanent non-inference clause. If any future consort attempted to alter the administrative boundaries of the heir's private estates, ownership of those historic assets automatically reverted to the Spencer trustees, who held the right to launch a public asset reclamation lawsuit in the High Court. The room grew completely quiet as the legal reality settled in. Camilla walked over to the table, picked up the photocopy her lawyers had been analyzing, and compared it to the original vellum. She looked at her chief of staff, who quietly informed her that their plan to merge the administrative costs of the Duchy of Cornwall with the central palace budget was no longer legally viable. If they pushed forward with the audit, William would release the full text of the letter to the media, exposing the decades-old financial restrictions and creating a massive public scandal that would permanently ruin the current Queen's public standing. William laid out his final non-negotiable terms. He demanded that Camilla's office immediately sign a formal binding declaration renouncing any future claim or administrative oversight regarding the Duchy of Cornwall finances. Furthermore, he required that the specific Spencer heirlooms currently held in the palace vaults be permanently returned to the physical custody of Althorpe House before the upcoming summer retreat. He told his stepmother that her choice was simple. She could accept her traditional place within the family hierarchy, or she could face an open public legal battle that her office could not possibly win. King Charles looked at the gold charms on the table, then looked up at his eldest son. He did not launch into an emotional defense of his wife, nor did he challenge the validity of the document. He understood that the preservation of the monarchy required absolute institutional stability, and William held all the leverage. The king turned to the head of the privy purse and instructed him to draft the necessary executive orders to fulfill William's demands immediately. He told Camilla that the administrative expansion of her office had gone too far and that the traditional boundaries of the house must be respected. Camilla did not say a word. She took a silver fountain pen from the writing desk, walked back to the coffee table, and signed the formal declaration of non-inference that William's solicitor had prepared. She turned and walked out of the sovereign's drawing room through the private side door, her chief of staff following closely behind her. The bureaucratic war that had threatened to tear the internal machinery of the palace apart was over in less than 20 minutes, settled by the irrefutable voice of a mother who had protected her son's future sovereignty from beyond the grave. William picked up the 3 vellum pages, placed the gold charms back inside his briefcase, and nodded politely to his father. He walked out of Windsor Castle and climbed back into his vehicle, the original document resting securely in his hand. He had not only protected his private estate and his family's historical heirlooms, he had established an absolute precedent for his own future reign. The hidden blueprint left behind by Princess Diana in 1997 had served its ultimate purpose, ensuring that the true line of succession remained entirely unassailable. The dramatic discovery of Princess Diana's hidden letter had permanently altered the balance of power within the British royal family. By utilizing this long-buried legal weapon, Prince William had successfully pushed back against Queen Camilla's administrative ambitions, proving that his mother's influence still shaped the destiny of the House of Windsor today. This high-stakes confrontation confirmed that the future king held absolute control over his inheritance, and that the old guard of the family would always protect its traditional boundaries from internal overreach. Charles Spencer walked out of the room to give his nephew privacy. Closing the heavy vault door behind him, William sat down on a plain wooden chair under the bare bulb of the basement ceiling. He used his pocket knife to carefully slice through the blue wax, making sure not to damage the paper beneath. He pulled out 3 pages of closely written text dated August 14, 1997, just 17 days before Diana's fatal car crash in Paris. The ink was a deep navy blue, written with the specific fountain pen Diana used for her most private correspondence. The text did not contain casual family updates or emotional farewells. It was structured like a formal legal memorandum detailing a series of specific binding conditions regarding the future management of her personal estate, her titles, and her expectations for her children's futures. As William read the first page, his eyes stopped on a heavily underlined section halfway down the sheet. Diana had laid out a precise set of institutional restrictions regarding the woman who would eventually marry King Charles. She wrote that under no circumstances should the woman known as Camilla Parker B.S. ever inherit or utilize the personal jewels, ancestral property, or ceremonial titles belonging directly to the Spencer family lineage. This document presented a massive challenge to the current palace narrative. For the past 20 years, Queen Camilla's team had been working systematically to integrate her into every facet of royal life, including the use of historic jewelry pieces that the public traditionally associated with Princess Diana. The legal reality of the British monarchy dictates that while the crown jewels belong to the state, a princess's private collection remains bound by the terms of her personal will and the wishes of her estate trustees. Diana's letter explicitly stated that if Camilla ever attempted to claim these specific items, the Spencer family trustees held the immediate right to launch a public injunction to reclaim them. William folded the papers and placed them carefully inside his inside jacket pocket. He walked out of the vault and met his uncle in the main courtyard. He told Charles that the contents of the box would remain strictly confidential until he had consulted with his own legal advisors at Kensington Palace. He climbed back into his vehicle and drove back toward London, the 3 pages of vellum resting securely against his chest. He knew that the document changed the entire balance of power within the royal household, providing him with an unassailable piece of leverage that his stepmother's team could not ignore. When William arrived back at his private office at Kensington Palace, he immediately bypassed his standard administrative staff. He called a single trusted senior solicitor who had managed his mother's private trust fund since the late 90s. The solicitor arrived within 45 minutes carrying a secure briefcase. William laid the 3 pages flat on his desk and asked him to verify the legal standing of the document. The solicitor put on his glasses, scanned the text, and pointed to the final paragraph on the 3rd page. The text showed that Diana had not just written a personal letter. She had formally executed the document in the presence of 2 independent legal witnesses whose signatures were clearly visible at the bottom of the page. The solicitor looked up at William and stated that the document was fully binding under English trust law. He explained that if William chose to enforce these terms, Camilla's current use of certain ceremonial assets would become an immediate legal violation. This left William with a critical decision to make. He held the power to completely upend his stepmother's public standing and strip her of key elements of her royal identity. But he also knew that revealing the document would trigger a massive internal war within the family, forcing his father to choose between his late wife's legal wishes and his current queen's public dignity. The mystery of how this letter had remained hidden for 30 years was still unsolved, but the immediate priority was how to use its contents to protect the future of the monarchy. William reached for his desk phone and placed a direct call to Clarence House, requesting an urgent private meeting with Queen Camilla for the following afternoon.